10:03. So let's start. Boker Tov and good morning. Sorry we're like on an off week. I will say again, I'm participating in our golf outing, so no class next Monday, but class in 2 weeks. And then I want to actually talk about the summer, but let's talk later. If maybe we'll take like 2 minutes at the end just to talk through what people would like for the summer, and to talk through that. Okay. So, but let's do some learning if that's okay. Okay, so I feel like there was so much Yiddish yesterday. I got to like brush up on my Yiddish. It was like a Fabrengen. Okay, that's fun. Okay, so what I wanted to do today, actually, if you remember, when we actually last met, we've been doing Pirkei Avot, and I wanted to just end sort of Pirkei Avot. I know traditionally we read Pirkei Avot during the there are different time periods during the year. One is during the counting of the Omer. And so we didn't get to the last chapter. And I want to just look at actually just one teaching that's probably going to take up the entire time together. It's really two Mishnahs, but they're considered one together. I want to look at that so that we can sort of close out our little sort of segment that we've been learning on Pirkei Avot, which is translated either as ethics of the fathers, teachings of the sages, and it's from the Mishnah about 2,000 years ago. So just to give you a heads up, we will be looking at, in chapter 6 of Pirkei Avot. But to back up, well, actually, let's look at the opening of it, and then I want to sort of pause for a second. So someone want to be a reader for me?
I'll read.
You'll read. All right, thanks. I see Lynn and Eric. So we'll start with Lynn, and then we'll switch to Eric. So I want to just start this off as we're going to read the intro to it, which is, hopefully it's going to come up. Okay, it's Pirkei Avot. Yeah, that's not right. Chapter 6. Got to find the right one. Sorry for spinning on you. Okay.
Spinning is better than spitting, so.
Yeah, there you go. Especially if you're a biker. I haven't done my Peloton in a month. It's not good. I know. Okay. All right. Just read the opening sentence for me, please.
Okay. Greater is learning Torah than the priesthood and then royalty. For royalty is acquired by 30 stages and the priesthood by 24, but the Torah by 48 things.
Okay. I don't love the translation. Let's just look in the Hebrew for a second. It's actually by a colleague of ours, Joshua Kolp, who's a conservative rabbi and professor. Okay. So just if you're a Hebrew reader, Gedolah Torah. Torah is greater, yoter. Greater. That's like another way to say greater, like really greater. Min hakahuna. Umina malchut, right? Torah is greater than priesthood or royalty, right? Shehamalchut niknet bishloshim ma'alot, right? For royalty is acquired through 30 levels. V'hakuhuna be'esrim v'arba'a, right? And priesthood is acquired by 24 levels. V'hatorah niknet ba'arba'im u'shmonim devarim, right? And Torah is acquired by 48 something. I don't like the word things, but
why is Devarim? Devarim is usually translated as things, words, other words. It only appears once here. It doesn't appear in the other two phrases.
Right. These are ma'alot, which is stages. That's sort of like some idea almost of elevation, right? Like Shir Amalot are the steps that the Kohanim would climb, right? The staircase is elevation. Right here, it's things, Devarim. So I guess maybe I will do, right? Even though I made fun of Rabbi Kolp's translation, maybe it is things. So does this remind any, before we get to the nitty gritty of what the 24 verses 30 verses 48, does this remind you of a teaching or a phrase or that you've heard before, comparing royalty, Torah, and priesthood?
There's a song goes like Shlosha Devarim.
Okay, there is that song, but that's different, right? Right, the world is upheld by three things: al ha-Torah, v'al avodah, v'al gemilut chasadim. So it's close, right? That's Torah, worship, and good deeds. Okay. Yeah, there I was thinking of a different one. Have you ever heard this one? We say it a lot. This is like a common one we use either at unveilings or shiva homes. There are 3 crowns the rabbis teach: the crown of priesthood, the crown of royalty, and the crown of Torah, right? Or crown of a good name, right? Or crown of Torah, right? But the crown of a good name excels them all. Does that sound familiar? It's actually in Pirkei Avot.
Yeah.
Do you want me to find it for you? I think it's 417. Should I try to find it or not? Or do you believe me? Have you heard that before? Anyone heard, right? The crown of a good name excels them all. There's a 4th crown, right? So this seems to be an extrapolation of that, right? That there's a crown that you can gain from priesthood, a crown of royalty, the crown of Torah, but the crown of a good name excels them all, right? This is sort of like the subsection of now let's go through what the crowns are. So,
well, the first 2 are inherited.
Good. Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to sort of boil it down a little bit. Right? The first 2 are inherited, right? Meaning you can't just, there's that, the famous joke about the
guy who wants to become a Kohen.
Yeah, right. The guy, right? Some guy comes to the rabbi, right? Rabbi, I really want to be a Kohen. Can you make me a Kohen? Right? I'll name a wing of the new building after you. I'll give you enough money, a donation. If I give you X much money, right? Can you make me a Kohen? The rabbi says, well, I really can't do that, right? It's sort of, I can't just make anyone a Kohen. And then like after a while, right, he asks like, why is this so special? Why do you want to be a Kohen? Right? And the punchline is, of course, right, my father's a Kohen, my grandfather was a Kohen, my great-grandfather was a Kohen. I really want to be a Kohen. Right? I don't know if the rabbi didn't explain to him that you actually are a Kohen and you didn't have to donate $100,000, but I don't know if the rabbi took the donation or not. But yeah, so yes, Jackie is right. So number 1 distinction is, right? Kohanim, definitely. Priesthood was that was a family line. Anyone couldn't be a Kohen, right? You had to follow the family line, right? Royalty, theoretically, right? The kings were all from the line of King David, right? After King Saul, right? The monarchy didn't follow King Saul. Theoretically, right? Monarchy also was a passing down within a family line, right? So what's the difference then with Torah, the acquiring of Torah?
You have to do it yourself.
Right. I will say, I'll say it a little bit more maybe not sophisticated, but right, there's a democratization of leadership here, right? Or some sort of, right? This is anyone has the ability, as you said, right? You have to do it yourself, Jackie, right? Number 1, it's not like your parents can't do this for you. Now, maybe they can set the stage for you. They can provide the education, and we're going to look through what those 48 qualities are, right? But, right, this is the democratization. Anyone can achieve this. If we go back to the original Mishnah, anyone can achieve this crown. Anyone can achieve the crown of Torah, of a life dedicated to Torah and study. Right? That's a big statement, isn't it? Right? Leadership is open, or the acquiring of leadership or elevation, if we want to go back to that word, ma'alot, right? Stages, right? Anyone can do this. Anyone why do you think that word the word was acquire, right? Right? Priesthood is acquired through 24 stages, and kingship through 30 stages, and Torah is acquired, right? Through 48 things. What do you think of that word?
About the stages, because if the first 2 are inherited, what do you have to do?
Yeah, well, we're going to look at it.
What are these stages? That part, that sort of threw me off of the inherited.
Right, we're going to actually look at it. We stopped right in the intro line. That was the intro line. The Pirkei Avot doesn't actually give you what the priesthood and the royalty ones are. The rabbis fill it in. So I have it in my commentaries, which I'll share with you. It only answers the 48 stages for acquiring Torah. Right. So how do you acquire it? I mean, is there like a training process to become a king that you've ever read about?
Well, they're raised to do certain things. And
Right,
there
they're
are
raised to do certain
obligations.
things, right? Maybe same thing, like, I don't know, I don't think there's a priest school. I
Oh,
never heard of a priestly school. It was like apprenticeship or whatever, right? You sort of like learned how you did it. I
Kind of
guess.
learned it from maybe family, mother, father taught it to their child.
Yeah. I
These
hate to
priests
say
probably-
back then, it probably wasn't
The
mother.
father. The father.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably
The
was not mother back
idea that the senior Kohen, when they dichened, the senior Kohen was always in the middle. And I don't know if that was one of the stages of acquiring, or, if it was just a matter of seniority, or how that came about to be. But when people dichened, the senior Kohen was always in the middle and in the highest position, so to speak.
So interestingly enough, at least the rabbis sort of answer or take on this stuff is not, they don't read this acquiring through stages thing as like a training grounds. How we're seeing this as training grounds, and we didn't get to it yet, but that's what the part for the Torah, the Devarim, the things for the Torah are. These are the qualities that sort of are necessary in order to achieve a life of Torah. So I'll give you an example. These are sort of the, let me just find it here. So for the priests, they actually say these are the ma'alot, are special advantages, the privilege that priests have. So it's interesting, right? So for example, I'll just read through the list, right? They, they get to eat the showbread, right? They get to have the oil. They get to eat the birds that are sacrificed, right? Any stolen property that goes to the temple, they can make use of. The ancestral fields that don't belong to anyone that go to the Kohanim, they have use of. The first fruits, the bikarim that are brought, they have use of, right? So interestingly, at least in this commentary, which is the Me'am Lo'ez, the Torah anthology commentary, right there, they list out 24 different types of things that the Kohanim are privileged and no one else to sort of make use of. I don't think that was the intention of the Mishnah, correct? Right? I like how we read it, right? These were sort of like the training regimen of how a junior Kohen becomes a Kohen, right? I don't think the ma'alot, right? The elevations really talk to privileges, is how the Kohen actually elevates themselves, right? So let me read to you the idea of the 30 ma'alot for the royalty. Okay. This is according to, this is Kahari, the great Israeli mailman. If you remember, we've studied him before. Okay. Royalty has 30 prerogatives on account of holding the reins of power, enumerated in Samuel 1. Number 1, the king will reign over you. The king may take your sons and appoint them for their chariots, to be their horsemen, to run before their chariots. Appoint them to be captains in the army. Appoint them to be major captains and minor captains, to plow the king's grounds, to reap the king's harvest, to make the king's instruments of war, to make the king's chariots. The king may take your daughters. The king may take your daughters to be perfumers, to be his cooks, to be his bakers, to work his fields and his vineyards and his olive orchards, to be his servants, your tithe goes to the king, and of your vineyards your tithe goes to the king. The king may take your they may take men servants and maid servants for their own quarters, and your donkeys, and put them to work, and they shall all be your servants. Okay, so that's one reading. That's all privilege, would you say? Again, when we look at the 48 levels of the Torah, very different. Okay? So, right, another reading is like another sort of 30 types of things that the king can do, which is the king may not judge, the king may not testify. This sort of sounds like the presidential immunity, right? A king no one may bear witness against the king. The king may not perform levirate marriage. The king may not contract levirate marriage with a widowed wife. The king may not marry one's own widow. I guess that must be a levirate one. When a member of a family, when a member of the king's family dies, they do not cross the gate of the palace to attend the funeral. When he is given the funeral, the meal after the funeral, all people sit on the ground, but the king sits on the couch. The king may call an optional war when necessary. The king may force his way to cut a road through the property of others. What's that called when you take property to make a highway? I forget what that's called.
Called eminent domain.
Yeah, eminent domain, right? So here, right, according to the rabbis, right, the king, one of the 30 privileges of a king is the king has the right of eminent domain. Let's see what else. When he sits in judgment, the Torah must be with him. This is right when he writes the Torah with himself. This is all from Deuteronomy. No one may ride on the king's horse. No one may sit on the king's throne. Now this thing sounds like a nursery rhyme. No one may use the king's scepter. No one may see the king when his hair is cut. No one may see the king naked, nor when he is in the bathhouse. Right? It goes on and on. So again, are these like qualifications for a king?
No, they're just privileges.
Yeah, privileges or like some like sort of strange set of laws or other things. Again, not like training ground for the king, right?
Mm-mm.
Those are not things that one learns, so to speak, to perform the duties of king.
Right.
These are just rules.
Yeah, so it's really interesting, right? That's what the rabbis here pick up on. It's probably because, again, they enumerated like 24 things, or they enumerated like, what are the 30 things? It's never like written. Now, mind you, by the time of the composition of the Mishnah, is the temple in service?
Wasn't the Mishnah post? After.
Probably not.
Right, like the first rabbis are during the time of the temple, but a lot of it is post destruction. So yeah, the temple doesn't really exist. Do Israelite kings exist?
Temple doesn't exist. There's no kings.
Right.
No.
So remember also, by the time, at least by the composition of the Mishnah, right? And by the way, I didn't say this. The 6th chapter is considered late, and is probably even later than Pirkei Avot and was added after. It's still like time of the Talmud, but probably a little bit later, maybe like 200-300. Right, this is written post Kohen, post royalty. So this is sort of this is like a nostalgic look back. You know what I mean? So there's some like nostalgia, there's some like the grandeur that doesn't exist anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So always when we look back on grandeur, right, there's sort of more, we look on it more like a positive privileged life that people had, correct? Could you possibly read that into then how the rabbis see this? And not like the strict training regimen, because number one, nobody was doing it. There were no real Kohanim weren't in service, and there was no king in service, right? So they didn't do it. Okay. Now I want to
It's like reclining at the Seder.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so now I want to, before we look at the 48 qualities, we have less than 48 minutes to look at the 48 qualities, but I wanted to ask you, just sort of let's brainstorm for a second. Like if I was going to ask you, right? It's an open book. What are the 48 qualities necessary to acquire Torah? Right? We didn't really define what acquiring Torah means, but let's just say to acquire Torah. What are the 48 qualities? Give me a quality. Let's throw out some qualities that you think the rabbis of the Mishnah 2,000 years ago would say, what are the qualities necessary to acquire Torah?
Curiosity, interest,
Piety.
Piety. Can you boil down
a good teacher.
A good teacher. Can you boil down piety to some like specifics? Because they get pretty specific in this Mishnah. Like, what do you mean by pious? Like actual examples.
Observance
Total
of Shabbat.
dedication.
Observance of Shabbat. What did you say about?
Total dedication.
Full dedicate, 100% dedication. Okay.
Access.
Access. Okay.
Belief.
Did you say belief?
Yeah, belief in God. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, that's probably important. Could be important, maybe.
How about the ability to read the Torah?
Okay. So some skill. Anything else? Now, I will say, let me pull back for a second. When I didn't say this, when the rabbis here are saying to acquire Torah, they're not actually saying like I have a mini Torah somewhere. It's not like the Torah. They're using Torah in a generic idea of a learned teacher. Like, so how do you become the level of a quote unquote, I guess we didn't say this, but it was implied, right? You could be a king, you could be a priest, or you could be basically a rabbi, right? So it's basically, right? This is what are the qualities necessary for a rabbi in Mishnaic times? I'm not saying like, not the rabbi of Bnei Yeshurun, right? The rabbis like we read of Akiva and Hillel and, pick your favorite Talmudic or Mishnaic rabbi, right? What were the qualities necessary for them to attain that level? Tell me if your answers are any different.
Humility.
Humility, yeah.
They have to know the mitzvot.
Mm-hmm.
The word Torah, of course, generically is used a lot in the Torah to mean the laws.
Yep. 100%. Other qualities?
Free time to study.
Yeah, I would probably phrase it not free time to study, but dedicated time to study. Is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
A good portion of them were rich. They were wealthy.
Okay, money.
Yeah, if somebody's struggling to make a living, they don't have time for studying Torah.
No, but some of them were workers.
Yeah, many of them. Yeah, there was a combo. Some were elite, wealthy, and some were the lowest of the lows. Yeah, blacksmiths and tanners and other things. Yeah, it was a combo. Right, Rabbi
It was
Akiva's
Tevye the milkman.
Yeah, right. Rabbi Akiva's the prime example. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. We're going to look at the text in a minute. Any other sort of qualities that you think? Like what? Should I now like shift it? Okay.
I guess not just knowledge of this mitzvot, but actually living that way.
Okay. Let's go to one more sort of list of qualities, see if we get anything different. Like now let's talk about rabbis or clergy today. What are the qualities you look for?
Easy to talk to.
Mm-hmm.
Compassion.
Compassion. Yeah.
Teacher.
Respect.
They are an example to the congregation they serve.
We just usually use the word dugma. That Hebrew word sort of says it better. Yeah. Yeah, Lynn? Oh. Okay, we ready to take a list of, we didn't get 48, by the way. I don't know, even know if we got 20, but that's okay. Yeah, I have the list, so we'll compare. All right, we ready to jump in?
Sure.
Okay, I'm going to hand it over to Eric to read a few and then maybe back to Lynn. Okay, so share the screen again. So I'm going to, you know what, it's not, unfortunately, it's not side by side or line by line. For Hebrew and English, that would have been ideal. So I'm going to sort of jump between Hebrew and English. So
You can switch that by hitting that. Yeah, that.
it is though.
And
Yeah,
no,
it's
not that one. No, wrong one.
Which one?
Hit that again. And go to the middle one. Yeah, that
There
one
you
right
go.
there. There you go.
Thanks.
That's closer. It still doesn't always line up.
Okay. There we go. Okay.
Okay.
So by Torah by 48 things, if you can see my cursor, right?
Yeah.
So, oh, no, hold on.
Oh,
now I gotta close
what
that.
happened?
Okay. Okay.
By study, by attentive listening, proper speech, by an understanding heart, by an intelligent heart, by awe, by fear, by humility, by joy, by attending to the sages, by critical give and take with friends, by fine augmentation with disciples, by clear thinking, by study of scripture, by study of Mishnah, by a minimum of sleep, by a minimum of chatter, by a minimum of pleasure, by a minimum of frivolity, by a minimum of preoccupation with worldly matters, by long suffering, generosity, faith in the sages, dogs, by acceptance of suffering. Learning of Torah is also acquired by one who recognizes his place, rejoices in his portion, makes a fence about his words, who takes no credit for himself, who is loved, who loves God, who loves his fellow creatures, who loves righteous ways, who loves reproof, who loves uprightness, who keeps himself far from honors, who does not let his heart become swelled on account of his learning, who does not delight in giving legal decisions, who shares in the bearing of a burden with his colleague, who judges with the scales weighted in his favor, who leads him on to truth, who leads him on to peace, who composes himself at his study, who asks and answers, who listens to others and himself adds to his knowledge, who learns in order to teach, who learns in order to practice, who makes his teacher wiser, who is exact in what he has learned, and who says a thing in the name of him who said it. Thus you have learned. Everyone who says a thing in the name of him who said it brings deliverance unto the world, as it is said, and Esther told the king in Mordecai's name.
Okay, thanks. Those were all 48. That was a lot, right?
A lot.
Yeah. Now let's break it down. So any sort of reactions, thoughts to the
Yeah,
list?
Rabbi, I have a reaction to two of them. It sounds, I think, very, very relevant and very important. However, number one, attentive listening. Listening is a very complex process, been studied at Cornell University and broken down into 5 stages. There are a lot of people who don't know how to listen or don't want to listen, number one. Number two, audience analysis. What is proper speech may vary from person to person. So when a rabbi puts together a sermon, he has to have some anticipation for his audience. How many will be turned on? How many may not understand the language? How many might think it's not relevant, etc. So we could spend a lot of time focusing on just one, attentive listening, or what is proper speech. And we all know, for example, when it comes to the Al-Chetz and Yom Kippur, a lot of the Al-Chetz are based on uttering words that are offensive to the listener.
Thank you. Yeah, you're already doing what I wanted to do, which was sort of break down. Some of these don't need a breakdown, but sort of go through and break them down. Any other reactions, thoughts to 48? As I say, we're going to
Interesting one by a minimum of sleep. That one was interesting.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. Well,
It may lead into like a minimum of, I'll call it wasting time. A person, this type of person would not do frivolous. Well, the word frivolous is in here, but would not do things that might be construed as wasting time, so to speak. So
yeah,
using all of his waking hours, the waking hours to a purpose.
Yeah. Does anyone have any other comments on that minimum?
Yeah, to sum it up real quickly.
Yeah.
It's basically saying to be a real mensch.
100%. Yes. Right. The whole list. Right. And that's sort of what I was saying was I wanted to get us out. Like we were so focused. The first list you were giving me was like on actual like Torah. That's why I wanted to pull it out because it's important to know, right? The rabbis are saying here, right? What are the requirements to be a person who acquires Torah? Like let's do it in a wider sense of the word Torah, right? Right? To live a life devoted to Torah means, right, being a mensch, right? And these are 48 levels that do that. I'll tell you, like one of the reasons that this teaching is really special and important to me is that my first day of rabbinical school, our dean learned with us. We spent 5 hours studying this. He said, if you devote your 5 years of rabbinical school to these 48 concepts, qualities, right, then you are going to be a great rabbi or have the beginnings to be a great. This is your training ground, right? So really, like, I sort of was alluding to it and talking about it both with the priesthood and with the royalty, right? These are the 48 qualities that I was taught to focus on during rabbinical school about how to be a rabbi, right? Which is how to learn Torah, right? Nothing here is like about studying Rashi, studying Talmud, right? It's nothing here is about, right, learning how to blow shofar, right? Like how to tie tzitzis, right? How to teach someone to put on tefillin, right? That's not here, right? Right? These are ways to live your life. And sort of as Eric said, to be a dugma, to be a model, right? And
well, King Solomon asked for an understanding heart, which is in this compilation as well.
Yeah. Oh, right. A lot of these, you can point to one or two people from the Bible, right? That these are qualities that they exemplified, or these are the qualities they even said you should do. Right. This is a larger compilation. This is like, one of those, training books, right?
So that expression that is used when someone has a milestone birthday, and at the very end you say, one who doesn't just count the days, who makes every day count.
Yeah.
I'm not sure where that comes from, but that's sort of along this line.
Yeah. I don't. It's in my little black book. Yeah. I don't know who wrote it. I have to look at who wrote that translation or prayer. Yeah. That's not in the Hebrew. Yeah. So just since we brought up minimum of sleep, and then we'll sort of make our way through, right? Mi'ut, where is it? I'll find it. Mi'ut shena. That's this one right here. Right? Little sleep. So yeah, I mean, basically what you said, the rabbis say, I'll give you one commentary here. Excess sleep causes loss of valuable time, and you actually are, according to the rabbis, more sluggish if you oversleep, right? However, lack of sleep depletes a person's physical and mental resources, right? So it's that you shouldn't oversleep, but you should recognize how much sleep is necessary in order to do everything that you need to do. And another commentary here, if a person wishes to devote all one's time to Torah study, they must learn to get by with a minimum of sleep, rising at midnight to begin their studies. If you learn to like sleep too much, you will remain poor in Torah. But if you force your eyes to remain open even when you're sleepy and they want to close, you will have your fill of the bread of Torah. Right? This is about, right, there's this Eric, I think you were talking about this phrase that we say bittul zman, right? Wasting time, right? The rabbis always say, right, you shouldn't waste time, bittul zman, right? Any free time you have, you should make good use of it. Right? So, and sleep is one of those things, right? There's an idea of how much sleep is necessary to be healthy and to be able to do all you need to do. You shouldn't oversleep. Okay, so let's make our way through.
Rabbi,
Yes.
what do the commentaries say about mi'ut derech eretz? Derech
Mi'ut
eretz
derech eretz.
is a positive thing. Why mi'ut derech eretz?
Mi'ut derech eretz. That's this one.
It's
Because how are you translating derech eretz?
derech eretz is kavod and
Yes. Derech eretz is a word that has multiple understandings. I'll just show you the Hebrew right now so that everybody can see.
I'm looking at the Hebrew, but
no, I want to show it to everybody else.
2 lines, 3 lines up. Where you are.
Oh,
1 line up.
Here. Thank you.
There you are.
Right here.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're translating it as what?
I see it as a positive thing, derech eretz, like I respect and all that. Why mi'ut derech eretz?
Right. So the rabbis are interpreting derech eretz, right? We usually say derech eretz is like the proper way of being a person, living in the world, right? Living in the world, being a mensch, being respectful, giving people dignity. That's derech eretz, right? When you go to the store, you're nice to the cashier, right? When you're at a stop sign, you give the other person the right of way that came there first, right? These unwritten rules, right?
Yeah.
Right. Just how we're supposed to be in society, right? That's derech eretz. So here they're translating it a different way. This is the translation. If you can see here, a minimum of preoccupation with worldly matters.
I see. Okay.
Right. So derech eretz, they're saying here is the way of the world, meaning, right? Right. Like, don't get so involved with everything happening in the, you can get so involved in all stuff that's very mundane.
Okay.
Right? Right? We can get caught up in all this mundane stuff. Let me give you what the commentaries say. Limiting one's business dealings and social intercourse. Right? Kibitzing. Too much kibitzing.
Okay.
Right? I'm just telling you what the rabbis are saying, right? Right? You can disagree with them. Here's another one. You ready for this one? This is very different than what we were saying, right? This refers to sexual proclivity, right? One shouldn't be so involved in your sexual desires, since that will take you away from study and everything else you need to do in the world. Right? Don't be so involved with the physical.
Okay, thank you.
Is that the same expression or is this a different one?
That was a second commentary on the same derech eretz. Right. Now, we should definitely, like in our world today, we have to be involved in worldly matters, right? We're not a secluded sect, right? We don't wall ourselves off from the general world, right? It's very important how we interact with the general world. So this might be one of those things to discuss where we talk about, right, how much should we be focused on Jews and how much should we be focused on the larger world, right? So, right, again, this was written post-destruction of the temple, right, when they needed to be insular, right? They needed to shore up themselves because they didn't know what was going to happen for their own survival of the Jewish people. So, Yeah, and again, they're translating the use of derech eretz here is different than ours, which is usually like being a mensch. So I want to go through. I actually want to go. Yeah.
Yeah,
Did you have
thank you.
another one you wanted to ask about,
No,
Rich?
no. I said thank you.
Yeah, sure. Okay. So just to go through the list again, right? So it's interesting. What is the first thing they say? Well, the first of 48 in order to acquire Torah is
Study.
study. I mean, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, right? You all said, like, I think everybody would agree that the first thing is study, right? By the way, the understanding here is when you study, right? You study with a teacher. It doesn't, I don't think any of the 48 was, right, have a teacher, right? Which other people said, right? So the idea here is that you have a teacher. And another commentary here says it also means that you're diligently studying, right? That you are a dedicated learner. It's not that
There's
I take 5
commitment.
minutes. Yeah, it's not that I take 5 minutes every day or 5 minutes every Tuesday, right? Or I hear Canon Shifrin's of our Torah on Thursday and I fulfilled my requirement for the entire week to study, right? This is that we really, not that Canon Shifrin's Thursday, Divrei Torah are amazing, but right, we should be doing more, right? We're here. So, okay, that's number one. Okay, Shmiat ha'ozen. Attentive listening, right? This was something that Elliot picked up on. This is, what do they say? This is like a double phrase, right? A shmiya is listening. So a listening ear. That's technically what this is, right? So, I mean, hopefully your ear is a listening ear, right? Otherwise, why do we have it, right? So a listening ear, right, means that, what do you think it means, right? What does this phrase, a listening ear, means?
Can I make a comment about that and a simple model that may be helpful?
Sure.
There's a professor at Brownell at Cornell has studied this for decades. There's a simple model for the 5 stages of listening. The acronym is RURER, R-U-R-E-R. The first is the R is receive. Are you open? Are you not do you not have distractive thoughts? To receive the message. And the message in person could be body language through words or voice. R, the you understand. If I don't understand what's being said to me, ask questions. R-U-R. The third one is how are we responding to what is there? And the rest of it is, how are we responding to what we think is being said? Ask questions and watch judgment. So those things we could go on for hours about this, but this RURER model has been studied and it seems to make sense. So if we're going to get anything out of today's lecture, we have to listen to you and ask questions.
Right. So it's very interesting, right? This attentive listening, which is like a huge thing now, right? Like people pay thousands of dollars to learn how to listen, right?
I have to say, Rabbi, that when we taught sales classes, the first thing we taught was listen to what the customer has to say.
Yes.
Listen to what the customer is coming into the store for.
Yeah. And I would add, right, I guess today, right, we would say that people speak in a majority, more than just vocally, right? It's also visual cues and body cues and all those other things. So I would expand that. I think the rabbis would expand it too. Just some of the commentaries on this, right? One must incline one ear to hear, not to lose even a single word, right? Every single word is a precious jewel that someone says, right? And it also perhaps they say that maybe Shmiat Ozen means that you should, right, be very proper in paying attention to the instruction of your teacher.
Rabbi, there's another very important thing that relates to every single word. That is the rate of speech. We are all programmed to listen at a certain rate to decode that information. And if speakers are keyed up, as they often are, there's too much blah, blah, blah too fast. And the listener might focus on one word and miss 10 other words that are uttered rapidly that are even more important to the sender. So the rate of presentation is very important.
Thanks. Actually, I thought I learned years ago that people could hear faster than we could speak, but maybe I'm wrong. That's why I listen to my podcasts at like 1.5 speed sometimes. But okay, keep going. Like we only got 2 so far, right? And it's 10:48. So, by the way, they also say there's an idea that, you're supposed to study out loud. Has anyone ever done that? Like some people learn by hearing themselves say it and then they listen. So that's perhaps the rabbis are perhaps saying that that's also what this means. Like if you're learning Talmud, you're supposed to do it out loud. Even like, if you practice Torah reading, anyone here practice Torah reading, right? I find like if I do it just in my head, I never really learn it. The only way I learn it is if I actually chant it out loud and I hear myself chanting it, and then it sort of gets ingrained in me. So I think that's the same way with a lot of other type of learning, right?
It's kind of like proofreading. You read it, you're better off reading it out loud.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, all my best sermons, when I edit them, it's not just looking at them, it's actually giving the sermon, it's actually speaking it, and then I can really tell like what should stay and what should go. Okay.
I have a few comments.
Yeah.
Number one is I think some of these are redundant.
100%. Yes.
For instance, the by awe and by fear.
Yes.
I mean, there's so many places in the Torah that uses the where is it?
Ema and Yira.
Yira to mean one or the other or both at the same time. I've never actually heard of Ema before.
It's there also.
But
yeah.
So I think some of them are redundant. Some of them I absolutely disagree with, like the minimum of sleep. It's been proven that you learn better and when you've had a proper amount of sleep.
Yeah, I mean, as I said,
you shouldn't shortchange yourself.
Yeah, as I said, now remember, this was 2,000 years ago, and a lot of them had day jobs, right? They would wake up early and study, and then they would work. Not all of them were elite and wealthy.
And the other thing I was going to say is, I think the best way to learn learn something and actually ingrain it into yourself is to teach it to somebody else.
Beautiful. Perfect.
It's not the learning it on your own. You got to teach it too.
Yeah. Guess what? That's going to go into our next one. So thank you. By the way, they distinguish the Ema and the Yira, the 2 fears and reverence, right? One is to God. Remember somebody talked about belief, right? So one of those is God, and one of them is either to the truth, reverence for the tradition or to your teacher. So that's they're understanding them as sort of applying to different entities. Okay. Arichat Svatayim. Right here they're saying proper speech. Anyone get our Hebrew teachers here? Arichat.
La'aroch in modern Hebrew is to edit.
Yeah. Interesting.
Or to combine or prepare. La'aroch shulchan is to set the table.
Yeah, shulchan aruch, right? A set table, right? Organized, ordered, edited, right? So what do you think it means right now if we're talking about lips, right? To organize your lips.
Think before you talk.
Yeah,
Yes.
to edit your lips. Yeah. Right? It's really interesting.
I have a question about proper speech. Has there in our holy text over the decades been a differentiation of what might be proper speech for a male and female? Today, there are tons of women who would openly use words that would be considered vulgar years ago. So does time and context make a difference? Are women
100%, by the way,
today?
100%, by the way, and the rabbis, I wouldn't say that they were sexist, but they lived in a different world 2,000 years ago, where, right? We actually, if you remember, we studied Pirkei Avot a year ago on Zoom, right? And when we studied there's a teaching there that says you don't listen to what a woman says because her thoughts are frivolous. It says that, and actually will lead you astray. We skipped that one this year when we looked at it, right? But again, right, that was I'm going to give the rabbis the benefit of the doubt, right? They lived in a different time period back then, right? So, right? Yes, context and time matters, and the time period we live in matters. So, arichat svatayim is right, not just proper speech, but the idea that I like that. Think before you speak, right? And also sort of editing. And this also goes back to the last thing that we said, that the way that you sort of proofread or edit or learn is by saying something out loud, right? So that could also be the ordering of speech. It's the idea of the process of saying something aloud to really get a sense of what's right, what's wrong, what we should keep, what we should know. Okay.
When in my teaching, I always told my students, talk to yourself. Talk to yourself. Because in talking to yourself, yes, somebody around you may think you're crazy, but now, of course, with cell phones, everybody's talking to themselves.
Yeah.
But if you talk to yourself, you have to take apart what you have just heard in order to, reiterate something, to be sure that you really know what's being asked of you.
I like that. I want to make a note. There are different, I didn't say this, there are different versions of these 48, and they both go in different orders, and a couple of the words are something. This is one of the places where there's some word variations. So bivinat halev, an understanding heart. What do you think that means?
It
Sounds
goes
like
beyond
empathy.
wisdom.
Sounds like a degree of empathy, understanding what somebody is feeling and verbalizing that to show that you're in the same, you can know where they're coming from.
Mm-hmm.
Connections between
How is
human
that-
A and human B.
How is that different than this one, which is besichlut halev, right? Like seiko, right? That your lev has seiko.
That you have the
Seichel as in the Yiddish
capacity.
word?
Yeah, what, Lynn?
Was that seichel as in the Yiddish word?
Yeah,
You
it's
were
the same
saying?
word. It's a
Oh.
Hebrew English. Yeah. Your heart has seichel,
Okay.
right? In some level of like intelligence, and
Common sense,
Yeah,
intelligence.
So what is that
Yeah.
word literally? Sichlut.
it's thoughts. Like it is intelligence. Haskalah. Have you heard of the Haskalah movement?
Mm-hmm.
It's the same word. And Ruth, if I'm getting this wrong in Hebrew, Ruth's my Hebrew teacher, so you can tell me.
I'm actually thinking about chabad, the three words that makes that up.
Chochmah, Bina, and Da'at.
Yeah, thank you. The difference between understanding and knowledge, and what's the third one?
Wisdom.
Wisdom. I mean, those are really hard to differentiate between, but
Yeah.
there is a difference.
Yeah.
The quality of each is different.
Yeah. Right. So this is understanding, and this is some sort of intelligence, common sense, practicality.
Horse
Right?
sense.
Yeah. By the way, there's a different version I have here, which is kavanagh halev, which is an attentive heart. So I give you the third version of it. Right. So attentive, understanding, intelligence. Right.
I've always heard kavanagh there translated as with a full heart. I don't know if that's a proper translation or not. My Hebrew isn't good enough for that, but
It can be,
that's
yeah.
how I've heard it.
It can be, yeah. So if you heard, I sort of alluded to this, but I didn't say it fully, right? Kavanagh is focus or aim, intention, purpose, right? When I was talking to the bar mitzvah kid, if you remember, he was the archer. So that's, again, Ruth, you can correct me, but I'm pretty sure that like if you're aiming for a target, the Hebrew word is kavanagh. Lekaven.
Yes, correct. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's what I think about. But yeah, it can definitely be a full heart because you're like 100% committed to something, if that makes sense. Now, let me ask you a question. How different is that from, let me see if I can find it. Here we go. Whoa. Do you see this one?
The left of
Lev tov.
good heart.
How different is that different?
Different from what?
What we talked about before. We had
From sechel?
understanding heart, we had
From sechel tov?
yeah,
Sechel,
seichel tov.
heart.
What do you guys think the lev tov is then? I mean, I'm not disagreeing with these. I'm just trying to parse what the difference is.
Compassion. Compassionate.
It's an openness somehow.
I like that.
Compassionate.
I'll tell you what this says. Unencumbered by jealousy and hatred, one's heart and mind are open to receiving, right, the message of Torah and receiving people. That's one commentary. I'll give you another commentary. One must have a good heart and not be jealous of others, jealous of anyone else's respect, right? That one should just be sort of be open to live with a lev tov. That appears other places in Pirkei Avot also.
One can understand those words and teach others those words, but it's not the final test action situation, whether one can apply those words in their relationship with others.
Right. So yeah, it's 10:59, so I sort of want to pull us back together. So, right, if you remember, right, priesthood and royalty, right, those were sort of like you already got it, you inherited it, and that talked about the privileges that came with those roles. Here, this is like the training grounds, right? How are we supposed to be as people if we want to, quote unquote, acquire Torah? Right? So what does it mean to live a life dedicated to Torah and to aspire to be a level of someone who has Torah? Right? So these are sort of the different qualities that one should live by. So we began it. So here's my question. Question is, do you want to do sort of part 2 next time, or do you want to just move on to something else?
Let's do part 2. This is great stuff.
So we'll go through and do part 2 now. And then we didn't even finish part 1. And actually, there's a whole thing about the differences between part 1 and 2. So we'll do deeper next time in 2 weeks. I think it's the 27th. And then now it's 11. I'm going to turn the recording off for a second. So